Hello, welcome to the final of the Symposia Collecting Impressions, 6 Centuries of Print Connoisseurship, co-organized by the Center for the History of Collecting and the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Department of Drawings and Prints, with support from the IFPDA Foundation. I'm Jenny Gibbs, Executive Director of the IFPDA and the IFPDA Foundation. This program is part of Print Month, which is held in conjunction with the IFPDA Fine Art Print Fair, which is currently online through Sunday, November 1st. Before we begin, I have to thank all of our friends and cultural partners for collaborating with us on a very successful calendar of Print Month programs. I'd like to especially thank Samantha Deutsch and Louisa Woodruby of the Frick Center for the History of Collecting for providing the inspiration with this series of symposia, which expanded what has traditionally been Print Week into Print Month. Today we have the great pleasure of sharing conversations with 3 powerhouses in the world of art collecting. The conversations, first with Joe and Leslie Garfield and then Jordan Schnitzer, will be led by Jennifer Farrell, Associate Curator of the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's often said that you can't talk about prints without mentioning New York-based private collectors, Leslie and Joe Garfield, keepers of one of the most complete collections of 20th century prints in the world. Aside from supporting the art world through their expansive collecting, the Garfield's philanthropy extends to numerous organizations, funding programs in the social services, the visual arts, and music, thanks to Joe Garfield, who was born into a family of music makers and music lovers. Joe is a writer who's had numerous essays and articles published in the New York Times, Newsday, McCall's, the Paris Review, and many others. She's the author of 2 books, a member of PEN, and co-chair of the National Arts Club Literary Committee. Leslie, of course, is the founder of his legendary and eponymous real estate firm in New York, which is now run by the Garfield son, Jed, where Leslie remains as chairman emeritus. Some of the organizations for which the Garfields and their business provide support include the IFPDA Foundation, thank you, IPCNY, the Whitney, the National Dance Institute, Tanglewood, and the New York Youth Symphony, where they established the Joanna and Leslie Garfield Award for Arts Philanthropy in 2015 to recognize individuals who provided leading support to arts organizations in New York and beyond. On the other side of the continent, native Oregonian Jordan Schnitzer runs the Portland-based real estate company started by his father in 1950. He's a 1973 graduate of the University of Oregon and in 1976 received his doctorate from Northwestern School of Law at Lewis and Clark College. Following his family's commitment to support art and culture, Jordan has created one of the nation's largest contemporary print collections, which is shared with the public through the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation. For more than 3 decades, Jordan has been assembling a teaching collection of prints, largely by post-war American artists, which he and his foundation have shared with hundreds of museums across the country through their lending exhibitions, which focus on small institutions or ones affiliated with colleges and universities to bring art to young people in places where access is limited. Jordan and the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation are also major supporters of the IFPDA Foundation, funding the annual Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation Lecture and the Jordan Schnitzer Awards for Excellence in Printmaking. Most recently, Jordan, in partnership with the Jordan Schnitzer Museums of Art at the University of Oregon, Washington State University, and Portland State University, has established a $150,000 Black Lives Matter Artist Grant Program. Each of the 3 Jordan Schnitzer Museums of Art will award 20 grants of $2,500 each to artists who use their voices, experiences, and artistic expression to reflect on social justice efforts in response to systemic racism. Before we turn over the conversation to Samantha Deutsch and then Jennifer Farrell, I hope you will join me in thanking the Garfields and Jordan Schnitzer for all that they do. And with that, I will turn the program over first to Samantha and then to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for your opening remarks. So without further ado, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Jordan and Leslie and Joe Garfield. This is really incredible. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Wonderful. So I don't know what I can say that Jenny hasn't already said. It's impossible to think about 20th modern contemporary print collecting without thinking of Leslie and Joanna as well as Jordan Schnitzer. So this is really a thrill and a great pleasure for me. And let's start with Leslie and Joanna Garfield, who are really absolutely incredible print collectors. I think anyone who's gone to any print related event have seen Leslie and Joe. Also very involved with the International Print Center of New York and Dieudonné, as is Jordan. So why don't we start with this piece by Heckel, and maybe you can tell me about the first work you ever bought. What led you to collect prints?
This is the first work I ever bought.
Yeah.
I went down to Munich with some friends to go to an exhibition at the museum. We got there a little early, and we walked into this art gallery, and the sun was shining through the window, so I kept walking away from the window, and I ultimately saw this image on the stand, and I was just floored by it. It's an illustration by Heckel for a 1917 translation of Dostoevsky's The Idiot in German. And I just was mesmerized, and I walked up to the woman at the counter, and I asked her what the price was of this particular image. She told me it was $55, and I thought for a moment, and I said, that's so much money. I'll go to the museum and think about it later. As I was driving back to Heidelberg, where I was stationed, I realized that $55 was something I could afford. And I called the woman up the next day, and the next weekend drove down to the gallery, and it was still on the stand, and I bought it. So that's my first acquisition of a German print, of any print. And I still have it hanging on our walls here.
I read in some interviews where you described acquiring this print as, quote, almost a major psychoanalytic breakthrough, end quote, and, quote, the primal scream that became a part of my life, end quote. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because as you mentioned, you still have the print, you still have it on your walls, and of course, you've gone on to collect over 6,000 works on paper. So this is, it really led to something quite major.
Difficult to answer, but I got very interested in German expressionist prints at the time, and I started to collect them. And by the time I came out of the army, I had about 14 or 15 German expressionist prints. And they were all bought in sort of a short period of time, and that just set me rolling.
What would you say it was about the German expressionists that struck you so forcefully?
Well, it was the bareness of the images and the strength of the artist's hand involving them. So I just continued collecting them and developed this large collection that we have now.
And indeed, you've moved to Max Beckmann, major holdings, and as well as Heckel, and really so many affiliate, George Gross, so many in the affiliated with German Expressionism. You also were very interested in Provincetown works well before the market, well before others had a similar interest. You really led the way. And Joe, I wonder if you could say a few words about this particular work and the story behind its acquisition.
Well, we were actually down at a corporate. We were visiting a collection at a businessman's office, and this was not part of what was being shown. It was actually, I happened to glance in a doorway, and on a table, I saw this picture, this print. I didn't know anything about it at the time, but I was immediately very taken with it. I love pictures of houses. I have a collection of miniature houses, from places we've been to. And this seemed to sort of epitomize what I loved. And I don't think I had a chance to, I don't even know if I asked what it was that day, but within the next week, we visited somebody's house, the Rambacks, Francoise and Harvey. And there, what do I see there but a copy of this print? And it turned out that they had gotten it at Pace Gallery, and called up Sasha Schwartz, and she showed us, she didn't have that one, but she had some other ones. But to make a long story short about this one, we went down to this collector's home, Warren Creswell, and he had a bunch of prints, and that sort of started the whole White Line collection. Also, it turned out that this print was signed by, it would say Grace Martin, and then we later came to know her as Grace Martin Taylor, but the name Frame was kind of erased, and we found out later from Grace herself that that was her married name at the time, but she didn't want to have that on print, so she kind of erased it. Kind of a funny story about her.
And you really tracked her down, didn't you? You were a bit like a detective finding Grace Martin Taylor. I've read that her name fell out of a frame, and you had to phone her. I wonder if you could tell a little bit about that and how you met her.
Yes.
It was Leslie, really.
I think that, excuse me, it fell out of the back of a frame, and I called up the number, and the name was there, and there was no answer. And I called again in a couple of weeks, and again in a couple of weeks, and again in a couple of weeks. I said, I called, and this woman said, "Who is this?" And I said, "Is this Grace Martin Taylor?" She said, "Yes, it is." And this is she, exactly. That's what she said. That was on a Monday or Tuesday. By Friday, Joe and I were on the plane down to West Virginia to visit her because she did have some works for sale. And the first thing is we walked up the steps of this old-fashioned, 1910 house and went out into the garden where she had beautiful flowers. And she took out 4 little sherry glasses and poured champagne for us. And we met her and bought work from her. And ultimately, I arranged a show of her work up in New York. And she and her daughter came up, and they arrived at the bus terminal on 8th Avenue. And we got them at Mary Ryan to put them up. And they gave a talk at the club that I belonged to. And that was the beginning of Grace Martin Taylor in our collection.
The interesting thing about her, we later found out, was that she is a cousin of the woman who became the main proponent of the White Line method, Blanche Lazelle. And she had actually learned the method from her and in Provincetown. And that's how they came to be called the Provincetown prints, because there were a lot of artists making them up there. And it's called White Line, of course, because when you dig out the groove for the pattern, when you try to print it, the groove comes out as a white line. So it's quite dramatic. I don't know if this particular.
And we have about 6 or 7 different states of this, from the drawing to the block to the second state. And, we have about 6 or 7 or 8, maybe, all different.
This brings up an interesting point because, first of all, something that we'll return to, which is that you've continually championed really challenging artists and also artists that push the envelope of printmaking. These are printers in many ways. They really invent new methods, as with the White Line, and then also with what the possibilities of printmaking can be. And I think what's so interesting is that not only do you have the prints, as we showed, here's the early dawn, here's but here we also have the wood block, which is a double-sided wood block. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how you do see this, because we think of you mainly with prints, but you also collect drawings and other pieces that relate.
We became familiar with a dealer named Martin Diamond. Somebody told us that he had some of these prints, and at his gallery there was this piece of wood carved with a pattern on it. I'm not sure if it was this one, but I thought the piece of wood itself with the carving was quite beautiful, and it was of course the block from which the print had been made. And we started collecting. We both did these wood blocks, which are unique, of course, because they are sort of the block upon which all the others are based. Well, the prints are made, and we were lucky that nobody had tried to either make multiple copies of them or defaced it with in order that it wouldn't be reproduced illegally. So they were still intact, a lot of them, and each one stands by itself as an object besides the print that resulted from it.
These blocks, were basically shown by the artist in their studio in Provincetown. This is circa 1915, 16. And you would go in there and look at the different wooden blocks and say, I'd like this one, or I'd like that one. And these blocks in those days in the 30s were selling for, in the 20s, for about $10 each. So each block is a different print. The colors are slightly different, and that's been of interest to us as well.
Yes. I mean, I think that's something that we see throughout. We see it with the British artists, and certainly with Diderot and Hamilton, this experimentation and move away from the standardization. And you can see also inscription. And then the drawings that you mentioned, really, I think it creates an archive that really allows one into the artist's thought process and stages or steps. Also, I was wondering, for these related works, for the Provincetown, did you mostly go through galleries, or did you buy from the artist, or a combination?
It was it was a combination. Mm-hmm. What happened through meeting Grace Martin Taylor, she introduced us. Blanche Lozelle, when she died, was one of 12 children, and they were all left basically 1/12 of Blanche's work. And we visited various relatives of Blanche Lozelle down there. And I always treated them not as a buyer for dollars, but as a dealer who would pay them fair market value. And I remember in particular, we went to one of Blanche Lozelle's relatives' houses while we were visiting down there, and he drove us back to the airport, and he said, I'm not interested now, but what would you pay for each one of these? And about a year later, around Christmas time, I got a phone call, and he introduced himself, and he said, I want you to know that I have shown these works to two major auction houses in New York City, and would you still be willing to pay me what you offered me last year? And I said, yes. He said, I'll send them today. I said, you can't do that. I haven't sent you. And he said, I don't have to worry about being paid by you. It's done. So it was a way of getting more and finding more Lozelle images through relatives and through dealers, obviously, who were invaluable in helping us.
That brings us also to the works in your collection with which I'm most familiar, the British modernist works. The Met recently acquired a very generous gift from you of over 700 British works on paper, which we will be featuring in an exhibition and a publication next year. And I think there are connections between these artists, their working process, and also this collection that you built with related material. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you came to discover the Grosvenor School artists, which again was ahead of the curve, and your interest in these works.
You want to talk?
It seems to me that I just remember starting, strangely enough, I'm going chronologically the wrong way, but Stephen Koppel at the British Museum at the time was showing a show of Hamilton's illustrations for James Joyce. And he is the one who introduced us, did he not, to these?
No, actually, I have some. We bought 3 from Mary Ryan in 1994. And then we were introduced to Richard Hamilton through Stephen Koppel, who is the curator of British art, prints at the British Museum. And I have a note that we bought 7 Richard Hamilton images in 2003 from him. And we bought 50 in 2004.
Actually,
So
we can jump ahead and show some of the Hamiltons. This is your Hamilton wall. I'm sorry. So you bought the Hamiltons.
And discovered that I went to an exhibition of Icelandic art. And there was some Richard Hamilton work there that I liked and had never bought. And I said to myself, if this particular image, the bowler hat, comes up for sale, I'm going to buy it. And this is the bowler hat, which became a very small edition because the artist and the printer got into an argument and the image was slashed. And this is it. And we've now bought a number of Richard Hamiltons because he collaborated with Diderot, and we have a large number of Diderots now.
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting is that you have Hamilton and all that he did with prints. And then you also have him working with Diderot, who Hamilton described as really pushing the boundaries of prints. So that's high praise indeed. And then you have these collaborations and these very rare works in this collection. And I think that that's something that we see with a strong, sweet smell of incense, as well as some other pieces. So maybe we could go back and we'll return to Hamilton, and maybe we could just say a few bits about the Grosvenor. So we have this group of artists that came out of the Grosvenor School of Modern Art in London in the interwar period, primarily led by Claude Flight, their instructor, in the lino cut method. So the color lino cuts that we see here, this is Sybil Andrews, Fall of the Leaf, who's very well representing your collection, as is Cyril Power, The Eight. This is a work that you recently gifted to the Met in honor of the 150th anniversary. And I think it's an absolutely stunning piece. I was wondering if you could maybe say a few words about the lino cuts.
Well,
What drew you to these pieces, which Stephen Koppel and Mary Ryan are really excellent spokespeople for the movement, and their knowledge is so vast with this.
I think I was tremendously drawn by the colors. For instance, the fallen leaf, the mellow yellows and reds and oranges just struck me as, and the fact that the trees look like a fan almost. There was something rhythmic about it almost that was tremendously appealing to me. And then we found out that, of course, she had done many other prints, and we got interested in those. One of the stories about her, it's sort of sad, is she had a bunch of her prints or her blocks, the wool and there was linoleum blocks being shipped to America. And somehow the ship sank. They disappeared forever. So I thought that must be terrible to have a large body of work like that disappear. But she just went on and created many more. It's such a sad story. It reminds me of the man who wrote The Chronicle of the Roman Empire. And I think it was in a closet and the cleaning person threw it out and he had to start all over again. It just reminded me of Sybil Andrews and this terrible experience.
Well, and I think that's really, really true. And she would recarve some of the plates, the blocks rather, later in Canada. These works are, I'm showing you the works when she was in England. She was born in England before she moved to Canada after the Second World War. And then, of course, we have Cyril Power, with whom she was closely linked and collaborated really in developing the lino cut. And I wanted to show that in addition to the works of Claude Flight, who was really seminal for the lino cut movement, you also have such things as his books, his manuals. This is his lino cutting and printing, which shows the image of Speed, which I just showed you, his lino cut, as well as from his earlier book, you have the tools and as well as other things that really allow a kind of comprehensive idea of how printmaking, how this particular movement occurred. In addition, you also have color proofs to show the process of the lino cut, of layering the various colors. These are for the tube train. And this is the final printed edition, as well as experimental proofs that show variation. Finally, what I think is so interesting is that with someone like Lil Schutte, you have the edition that was issued in 32, and it was so popular that the USA edition was issued, created 5 years later by the artist. And you collected both to really see any changes made, as well as drawings and the gouaches. So it becomes, or it is, an incredible study resource. Here we see Nevinson's The Blue Wave. This also led to the interest in the earlier British modernists, such as Nevinson. This is his Blue Wave of 1917. And Column on the March of 1916 with these war images. So if you could just say a word or so about what drew you to Nevinson and the war images, because he really redefined what war art could be. As he said, he wasn't interested in any heroic depictions, but the working man in khaki. So these are very, very tough works. In fact, they were almost censored at one exhibition. So I was wondering if you could maybe say just a few words about Nevinson and the role he has.
Well, in terms of Nevinson, he actually served in the war and was overseas and did a number of prints of the devastation of France, and then did these marvelous color prints later in 1930. Those images you were showing before was circa that period. These were done about 1918, 1916, etc. And I just loved them, and they came up very rarely.
Yes.
The Blue Wave, for example, I had been looking for it for a period of years. And, it reminded me of the Japanese printmaking in the 18th century, Yuzuyuki. And some dealer from London called me and said, Leslie, did you know that this image is coming up in a couple of days? And I said, no. And at any rate, I said, yes, you can buy it for me. I will pay you the commission. I don't want it. And he said, no. I said, yes. And this is it. And I love it. So it's one of my favorite prints.
It's incredibly powerful. So we mentioned earlier and saw briefly, you live with much of your art. Here we can see an installation of Diderot with the Piccadillys and Hamilton, as well as Hamilton's toaster, and then Diderot, and then also the covered Piccadillys, really going in depth with the Piccadilly collection. So finally, I just want to conclude by saying that you've also been incredibly supportive of American artists such as Jasper Johns, but also the museums, your work with museums. And here you can see your Jasper Johns making a highlighted appearance at the British Museum for the American Dream Pop to Present. And your Jasper Johns is now on the subway, which I always see as a connection with the Grosvenor and Frank Pick. So finally, I think maybe if you could just say a word or two about how you see your collection functioning, because you are incredibly philanthropic. You're also very generous with the loans. Your loans were absolutely integral to my World War I show at the Met a few years ago. So how do you see your collection functioning?
I see it functioning in a different way, and that is basically strengthening departments in museums and institutions, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm so happy to put it up for auction and let it go to another person. It's as simple as that.
Well, I think on behalf of all museums, we're incredibly grateful for your support and enthusiasm. And we will continue this conversation with questions and answer after our next presentation. So thank you, Leslie and Joanna. It's a fascinating glimpse into your collection.
Thank you.
Okay, you can see just some Baumeister as well as some storage. So we're moving to Jordan Schnitzer, and Jordan Schnitzer's passion for printmaking, especially contemporary printmaking, is very well known. Anyone who's been at Print Fair has seen Jordan go up and down the aisles with a kind of fever speed. He has been incredibly encouraging of museums as well. We first met through an exhibition I organized from his collection of Jasper Johns prints from at the University of Virginia. So why don't we begin? Here is Jordan with Rosenquist in his galleries. I think Jenny covered much of his philanthropic activities, but we'll get to that in our talk, as well as his extreme passion for prints. The director of Drawings and Prints at the Met, Nadine Orenstein, has described you as an evangelist for prints and printmaking, which I think is really an accurate description, because not only of your passion, but your mission to spread this love of prints, which we will talk about. So here is a baby Jordan, age 2. And I think we can look at these images, Jordan with his mother, and we'll talk about your mother in a minute, as well as your father. So maybe if you could just say a few words about the influence of your parents on you at a young age in relation to art.
Yes, and before I do that, I first want to say how honored I am to be on the same virtual presentation with the Garfields. Mm-hmm. They are heroes to me. Their passion for art, their philanthropy, their role models for all of us about one, just picking whatever it is that happens to be art, but it's wonderful when you have a passion for collecting. And then to share and give back, it makes it even more exciting. So Leslie and Joe, thank you for your leadership and being a role model for me and so many others.
Thank you.
Speaking of role models, we're just seeing images of my mother and my father. And as an only child, my mother, when I went to first grade, enrolled in the Portland Art Museum Art School, that the slide I think is next. And well, that shows the business, but there's the Portland Art Museum Art School, Belushi building, and she took some art classes. And 3 years later, at the urging of the principal artist in Portland, she opened the Fountain Gallery of Art. I think there's an image now of that. It was the cheapest space in Portland, $50 a month. And she, along with her mother and another lady, opened the gallery. And so she opened the door for me as others opened doors for all of us. And I think part of a legacy theme here about me, and I'm sure the Garfields, is that we were all lucky that somehow art entered our lives. And a part of my passion with my collection and the exhibition program is hopefully, especially with young people, to help expose them to art. So we break down this barrier that somehow people think that art is some elitist thing for someone else. It's for everyone. So in my case, my mother opened the gallery, and there's another image now of her, they were doing the sheetrocking and painting and getting the space ready. And there she is, a beautiful woman. She passed away April 4th at 91, had a full life. And in addition, the art was very philanthropic with my father and so many social causes and so forth.
So maybe
yes?
we could say a few words about your mother leading to your love of art.
Sure. So, as I said, she opened the gallery, and I remember a couple days before it opened, I was down there, and the artists were all helping her paint the walls, and I saw this funny cabinet, and I thought, that's odd. Those little drawers, you couldn't put clothes in there. Wonder what it is. And I went over to it and pulled open this drawer, and there was this stunning Stanley Hayter work that I didn't know the name of the artist, but I saw this beautiful colored work, and she came over my shoulder and she said to me, "Do you like that?" And I said, "I think it's beautiful." She said, "Well, you can have it." So the first piece of art that I was ever given was by Stanley Hayter, and we still have it, of course. And so it's interesting, as my art journey proceeded over the next 30, 40 years before I became evangelicus is a nice word. I think addict is a better word. Passionate about prints. Interestingly enough, it's like I really went back to my roots of the first thing I picked was a print.
That yes, and not only a print, but a print by Hayter, who, with all of his experimentation, I think is really quite fascinating. And this is the first work that you purchased. This was about
That's
5
right.
years.
Yes. So Louis Bunce was an amazing artist in Portland, like there are in so many communities, that they are the bedrock of the arts movement. And he was a professor and teacher at the art school. And this was a small study, which I liked. And went up to my mother. I was 14 and wanted to buy it. And it was $75. And with the family discount, it was $60. And I paid $5 a month off my allowance. And as I've said, if I missed a payment, my mother always knew where to foreclose on the art, since my bedroom's next to theirs. But I still have that, and I treasure it, and treasure the relationship with Mr. Bunce. He was wonderful to me, and I think he was a brilliant, brilliant artist.
So to move now into prints, which was really a major event. Was it 1988 that you bought the Stella, Dine, and Hockney? Is that right?
Yes. I was on the board of the Portland Art Museum. I've been on 30 different nonprofit boards, and I came up from a meeting, and there was an exhibition of contemporary prints of what I'll call the New York School. Mm-hmm. And my mother had to turn the gallery, had sort of retired and turned the gallery over to one of her assistants, and the gallery still continues. And I felt, frankly, a bit lost. I still was committed to buying art of our region. And even though I've become a large purchaser of the biggest artists in the country, I always preach at all the openings around the country the importance of all of us supporting local artists. But in the meantime, I saw this exhibition and went down to a local gallery, the Ogden Gallery. Bob Cox, the proprietor, and I ended up buying these 3 works. So these were the first 3 works of what has now evolved to one of the largest private contemporary print collections in the country. And as I said, addict would be a more appropriate word to reflect my passion and pleasure from collecting.
And then you have highlighted a lot of these acquisitions in traveling shows. We'll show a few images, as well as books, including catalog raisonnés. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see that functioning within your collection, this publishing program.
Sure. I think like the Garfields, once I had the art bug, I just kept, buying things that fit my budget and so forth. When I'm asked about where did you put all the stuff, I said, wait a second, folks. My mother was a gallerist. I was there and heard her say 1,000,000 times to someone, don't pass up something that speaks to you, even if your walls are full. So I'd blown through wall space before I was out of college. So I just kept buying the prints. And then the director at the University of Oregon Art Museum, on whose board I was on then, asked if he could do an exhibition. He did. I went down and saw 56 works from the collection, thought it was so amazing. But then what really was transformative for me was when people came in and I saw their excitement. And I thought, gee, let's put a plan together to match my passion for buying the art with exhibiting it. And so that's led to the 140 exhibitions we've had now at 90 museums around the country. We're fortunate with the business that I run. We do all these for free. And then we fund outreach money, especially to bring in lower income kids, seniors with dementia, whatever audiences the museums generally don't have funding for. Along with the exhibition program, I now have 9 people work full-time in it. We have a 56,000 foot warehouse that holds the 19,000 things we have now. We started publishing books to further the academic and educational role these artists have had and help not only the sophisticated art folks like you guys, but the general public learn about Frank Stella and Ellsworth Kelly and John Baldessari and Warhol and Alison Saar and so forth. So we have 4 books under. We're printing the Terry Winters catalog raisonné now. We're doing a book on Bruce Nauman. We're starting a book on 2 or 3 others. Judy Chicago, a new friend we've just recently met. So we've tried to do our share of the academic and perpetual cataloging so that future generations can know how the work was done and the additions and all the information that's in these catalog raisonnés.
They're just really the most valuable resource. It's an incredible thing that you do. I wonder if you could say, here we go. So here's some more of the philanthropy with the book awards, with the Black Lives Matter Artist Grant Program, residencies, lecture series, the gallery at Dieudonné, as well as many, many other charitable. And here are your 3.
Yeah.
Museums.
So the university museums, again, as I said earlier, that I was lucky. Those doors were opened by my mother, and yet so many people out there. Okay. They are fearful. They don't know about museums. They don't know how wonderful these places are, or galleries. I preach to people, you can go to a gallery, it's free, and ask questions. Galleries always love to tell you about why they've selected certain artists. So I funded 3 university museums. We're working on a 4th at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and probably, hopefully, a few more if I can afford it. And it just brings me great joy to know that these museums are now welcoming to students. It's the last chance that young people are sort of in a contained environment where if they just realize it's okay, maybe they'll graduate and go back to their communities and be part of the art world in all the cities across our wonderful country.
I keep thinking of the wonderful story you told me about when a principal told you that they had funded the 5th grade class. We're going to be visiting one of your exhibitions. And you said, why only the 5th grade? She said, well, I don't have money for grades 1 through 4. And you said, I do. And so you provided buses to actually bring the children in. And aware that people may be missing the school lunches, you also provide lunches, as well as hiring local artists to work with teaching and tours.
It's amazing. Certainly a community like New York's a lot different, but it's amazing what $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $30,000 does to a lot of smaller communities. You can get 1,000 kids in. Now in Missoula, Montana, where that happened with that story, what also was wonderful is we brought in 300 kids from two tribal communities. And since Jack Becker, the director of the Fairland Museum, of the museum in Omaha, had picked that work, he'd also picked 2 Northwest Native Americans. So the idea that we funded 300 Native American kids from the Salish and Kootenai reservations to come see Jasper Johnson, Ellsworth Kelly, and Chuck Close, and Ellen Gallagher, and Kara Walker, and Red Brooms, and on and on. But also saw Joe Feddersen and Rick Bartow was especially rewarding for me.
So to move to your print collection, which enables these amazing shows, what drew you to print collecting, and especially to collecting works by so many contemporary artists, really a focus on living artists?
Well, two things. One, I like I was thinking when Leslie and Joe were talking about their collection and you were talking about all the British artists. And what I wrote down to myself is too much art and so little time. It is so much fun learning about these areas that I know so little about, like much of life. But in terms of what I'm collecting, it's the post-World War II, principally American artists. And the reason I think is because these are artists of my time, of my life and your life. And they speak to us with the post-World War II period about the themes affecting our society, our country, and the world. And I think we are lucky that we've had several waves of some of the most creative, most brilliant artists in the history of time. So I love art of our time. Why works on paper? Well, first, I collect all mediums, and I have several thousand paintings and sculptures and other kinds of things. But I love works on paper because of the collaboration. And while collaboration is nothing new in the art world, I mean, Michelangelo, Van Gogh, I mean, not Van Gogh, but Michelangelo, and I mean, all those big older folks. But if you talk about today, starting with June Wayne creating Tamarin and the Master Printers Program, and you go to Gemini or Two Palms Press, David and Evelyn Lasry, who do such brilliant work, and Catherine Brown, all the fabulous publishers we've got, Ken Tyler. Amazing partnership between the artist and the brilliant technicians that produces work on paper that's never been experienced before. So that's exciting to me. Plus the ability to collect a substantial amount of it, because I'm really building a teaching collection. So therefore, you know, even if I had the money to buy today a $40 million Warhol, I don't mean to say that wouldn't be pretty amazing, but I'd be another rich person with a Warhol painting. We have 1,200 Warhols, and therefore it's like we have a study center, and we can exhibit every period of his career and every theme that he brilliantly created.
Absolutely. And you mentioned printers. I think, you know, Craig Zamiello's work on Ellen Gallagher's Deluxe is just amazing. You also, I showed a work by Vanessa German, who you are not exclusive to prints. As you mentioned, you also collect paintings, sculptures, and support artists who do more performance-based works. And you've also been very involved with Leonardo Drew recently, too. I was wondering if you could say a few words about what drew you to his work. And I think this ties in also to your connection with Dieudonné and the handmade, the paper.
Yes. So some years ago, Dick Solomon, who I think is just a legend in the print world, and I'm so fortunate, I think, to have him as a friend, called up and asked if I would fund a lecture series at the IFPDA, and I said, you bet. So we've done that for maybe 10, 12 years now. And about 4 or 5 years ago, he said, hey, have you heard of Leonardo Drew? And I said, nope. He said, you will love him. And I said, okay. And saw his work. And Pace has done some brilliant publishing of some of his works on paper that are three-dimensional and incredible. And as I met him, I became very taken with his work. Brilliant young man. And now we're buying all sorts of these sculptures and big, giant pieces, and having some national shows of his works. We probably have about 80 things of his right now. And actually, I talk to him about every 2 weeks. He's just so engaging and so much fun. The same is true with Hank Willis Thomas. Met him, thought his work was brilliant. We went ahead and bought that big Love is Forever, the big that was on the Brooklyn Museum, and that's at the Portland Art Museum right now. But we've just finished negotiating to buy 132 things of his, develop a national exhibition. This big painting that was at the Kane Corcoran Gallery in LA we purchased, and he's just, I think, just an incredible human being and an amazing artist. Alison Saar, we've started developing relationships with a lot of the current rising stars, and that's been a joy for me. I always was sort of envious because I wasn't around then, like Robert Meyerhoff and the amazing collection he created, but the relationships he had with Ellsworth Kelly and Frank Stell and Robert Rauschenberg, and was a different time and place. So I'm now making some relationships with some of the rising stars and enjoying the personal relationship as much as the passion for their work.
And you mentioned the talks. It's interesting to me that you bring the artists often to these university and college museums in other parts of the country where people may not be able to travel to Los Angeles or New York or Chicago. And so you also allow students and members of the public to have listen to great discussions.
Yeah, in addition to funding students and seniors and whatever group it is, we also fund artists in residence, printmakers, so people can see how it's done, have the kids come in, bring the artists in and have lecture series, symposiums. Oh, for instance, for Kara Walker, where we have all of her prints and multiples, and she's just been so important to this country, way ahead of, unfortunately, of our time with the Black Lives Matter movement now. But, you know, she'd had a major exhibition at the San Francisco Modern Museum, the Tate, the MoMA, whatever. So we wanted her exhibition to travel to different communities. It started at the Crocker Museum in Sacramento, went to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon, then it went to Boise. In each of these places, we funded symposiums. We got together major leaders of the African-American Black community and Caucasians and others, and went to Laramie, Wyoming, Springfield, Missouri, pretty white communities. So we tried to get her work and her message in front of different audiences. And it's just very satisfying to be a facilitator. You know, I have no sense of ownership, and I'm sure the Garfields would say the same thing. We are lucky stewards and middlemen between the brilliant artists and the institutions that we help support and loan work to, in addition to enjoying the art that we have in our own homes.
And I was wondering if you could say a little bit of your work with Crow Shadow and your support of Native American printmakers, where you've been also you've supported Native American artists since your mother with her gallery and the work you've done. So with exhibitions and publications. I was wondering if you could speak about that a little bit.
When I speak at all these exhibitions, the message I try to get across is artists are always chroniclers of our time, whether we go back to the caves in France, to Egypt, China, whatever. They're the ones that force us to deal with issues of our time. And I think far too late, but I think in 20 or 30 years, historians will look back at this period of time, the 2020 on, is a time when many ethnic communities came into their own from a societal standpoint far later than it should have been, but came into their own in a major way. So we're also blessed, I think, in the art world to have a number of artists of color doing phenomenal work. Now, the Native American artists that I collect, there's by Pendleton, Oregon, 180 miles away, the Confederated Tribe, one of those reservations where the government horribly smushed a whole bunch of tribes together. But the fact is that James Lavador, wonderful man, found a building and created Crow Shadow, a nonprofit that focuses on Native American artists. And that's one of James Lavador's work. He is brilliant in a number of major museums nationally, but what he's done by creating this Crow Shadow, and we buy all the work they produce, Wendy Red Star, I mean, a number of brilliant young artists, and they are, I think, very effectively being, again, chroniclers of our time, getting images in front of us to help us think, which I think is the ultimate goal of every artist.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. We can continue the question and answer, but also open it up to the public, because I know people will be very upset because there have been many, many questions to Leslie and Joe, as well as to Jordan. So Samantha, you've been monitoring the questions. Can you?
Yes. I think I'll start with a question that all three of you can answer, really. And that is, how much have gallery owners influenced your collecting?
Tremendously. Tremendously.
I think what's fabulous about galleries, remember, I'm biased here, my mother was a gallerist, right, is they help open doors for you to so many new artists that you wouldn't otherwise see. One of the concerns I have about all the art fairs, on one hand, they're getting art to the public, but in the art fairs, you got a little 10 by 12 foot booth, and they generally have a collection of different artists. Whereas when you go to galleries that are expensive to run, you're able to see these one man and woman exhibitions, different political themes or whatever. So it's quite a different educational experience to go into a larger space like Matthew Marks, and all the people in New York and around the country, these fabulous galleries. So they're a critical piece, and it's important that all of us support them because they're the front line. Without the galleries, okay, how would the work get exposed to all of us? They're just a critical piece of the art chain, and they need our support.
Leslie and Joanna, do you want to add anything about the role of gallerists and dealers with building your collection?
Very important. And I'm thinking of our role with Tandem Press in Madison, Wisconsin, and how important it has been being affiliated with them in our increasing interest in certain artists. And we went out there, it was the last time we were there, and we were looking at the new prints that had been made, and I sat down for a moment in Paula's office, and there was a book on 4 or 6 pages on Bill Weege. I had never seen his work before, and I went out to Paula. Everyone was still in the print room, and I said, "Do you have any Bill Weege?" And she said, "Yes, sit down for 5 minutes in my office and I'll set it up." And we went inside, and I said to my wife, who had originally seen a Bill Weege at the museum, and loved it. And I said, "Which do you like the best?" And Joe chose one. And as we were walking back to Paula's office, I said, "Paula, I have some funding from a foundation, and I want to buy them all." And she said, "I'll take pictures of them." And she did. And I first offered it to the curator at the British Museum. I won't go through this, but each museum I said, I would like to make a donation of this artist's work framed. Would you be interested? Do you have anything? Will you show it? And I heard from 4 museums, and we established a reputation, I think. And Dick Solomon was mentioned just a couple of moments ago by Bruce, and I called Dick up, and he said, "Yes, we'll show him at Pace Gallery for 2 weeks." And he did that, and we had a party, and he sold one image for a good amount of money. And now he's a friend, and I'm doing everything I can to promote his art because I think it's so wonderful.
This is Jenny. I just wanted to jump in for a sec. We're traveling tomorrow to Madison for a virtual Zoom studio visit with Paula at Tandem. So, yeah, so you can see what they're working on right now.
Yeah.
A lot of wonderful things. Everything is wonderful.
So I'll jump in and say first to Leslie and Joe and then to Jordan. What advice would you give to someone interested in starting a collection, a print collection?
Well, I think for those of us lucky enough to go to the IFPDA, for me, it's just heaven, right? But there are lots of people across the country that don't have that opportunity. And there are galleries in all our communities that have lots of art and also have specialized often with works on paper. And also go online. Garfield just mentioned Tandem, which we also put Paula on a pedestal. I mean, she's so fabulous in the work they do. But also, I mean, Gemini in LA with Sid Felsen and the late Stanley Grinstein, what they've done, and Bill Goldston and Katie Michelle, some of the younger people in New York, Jean Millant. I mean, you can go online for all these publishers and see where their work is and have a virtual tour and then go to a gallery and see their work. Also, Sotheby's, Christie's, Butterfield's, Heritage Now, Phillips. They're incredible. And I've been so lucky to have such close relationships with the heads of the print departments of all those. Anyone can bid on auction, at least get those catalogs and see all the works and learn. It's like an encyclopedia of the best of the best. So there are lots of ways to get into the works on paper print world that really is quite cost effective. There's something at every price point for everybody.
That is right. Absolutely. Leslie and Joe, Richard Brown Baker, his advice to collectors was get there first, decide promptly. And I was wondering what advice, Leslie and Joe, you would give to someone looking to build a collection.
I think meeting a person like Richard Brown Baker, who is a good friend, and learning from him and hearing his enthusiasm, unquenchable, and someone like that is a great person.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Brown Baker, I'm using as an example.
Mm-hmm.
I think just knowing somebody like Mary Ryan, who not only from whom we bought prints, but has introduced us to quite a few artists and is tremendously knowledgeable about them. You can learn a lot from these people.
And Susan Sheehan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There are so many wonderful people out there, particularly people at auction houses. They're so knowledgeable. They call you up in advance. They do this, they do that. They're exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
One issue that I think all of us who love works on paper and love all mediums is there still unfortunately is almost a second-class citizen attitude about works on paper and prints. And that's something like the IFPDA, we've talked with them before, and all of us who love art and love works on paper especially need to constantly be helping to get curators and museum directors to understand their role in the whole art food chain. Because I think we all feel that Garfield's and self so lucky to be in the works on paper world.
Yeah.
And I think, Jennifer, you've done a wonderful job at the Met, and Nadine, the department there has taken on a whole different level of energy with both of you in partnership, helping do your share at that amazing institution of getting people to realize the beauty and creativity of works on paper.
Well,
So,
thank you. I mean, Leslie, Joe, did you want to say anything?
I was just saying, it was interesting. I was thinking about Jordan and the influence of his mother in her gallery. And neither Les nor I, and I think it's particularly interesting in the case of Les, because he started out so early with this interest in prints. I don't think there was a piece of art in their house, not because they didn't like art, but it was just not something they'd consider collecting. And I would say my parents were literature and music people rather than art people. And we had one book of modern American paintings, and I knew every painting in that book by heart. But that we did not have a collection of art books. So what am I saying? I'm just saying you get to these things through chance. And, in Les's case, lucky positioning geographically, that he was in Germany at that time. Maybe it would have happened somewhere else with a different kind of art, but that happened then, and so that was wonderful. I wanted to say about Nevinson, I don't know why, I was thinking about that war picture. But, at the beginning, he was extremely enthusiastic and patriotic about the war. And that picture shows how he later became extremely opposed to violence and the war completely. And I think part of his best art, the best prints we have by him, are pictures of airplanes that were during the war. So somehow or other, that got into so much of his imagery. And I'm rambling on, so stop me.
I just want to say how important and how fortunate we've been to have an assistant who's more than an assistant.
Mhm.
She's a curator and has been with us maybe 8 years, and that's Heather Hess, Dr.
Yes.
Hess.
Mhm.
Yeah, she's catalogs everything. It's amazing. We have a whole room. Well, I'm sure Jordan does too. Full of catalogs.
He has rooms.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And if you want anything, she can put her finger on it immediately, and it's amazing because there are so many to keep track of. But she always knows how to find them.
Well, I think this has been an amazing discussion. Thank you to Leslie and Joe and to Jordan. I think your insights have given us so much to think about with the role of prints, the support of the art, also the way your collections were built, the instant passion and life-changing moments that you both described when seeing artists. Les and Joe, you sound like detectives traveling out to West Virginia and tracking down artists, but then what it led to and the public exhibitions of the White Line artists that came from your collection and what you've done to raise awareness about that area, as well as the Grosvenor, is really incredibly important. And Jordan, with all the exhibitions, that's how we first met, was I curated an exhibition drawn from your collection. And I can tell you the difference it makes in the lives of the students. It really is absolutely instrumental. So I don't know if Samantha or Jenny have any other questions. We're over 1 o'clock. And for those of us supervising remote teaching, we have a separate schedule, but maybe there's some questions from the audience.
Can I ask the Garfields what in the last week or two, what they may be buying and what they're looking at right now and are excited about?
Speak or two. There's always something coming in.
Yes. I bought a Lozelle woodblock print. It was an auction to benefit the Provincetown Art Association, which I'm somewhat involved with, over years. And I just saw it and bought it. So I haven't seen it yet, of course. But so that's pretty recent, Saturday night.
We
Good,
get
thank
called,
you.
well, I should say that as collectors, and I'm sure this is true of Jordan too, you have to be prepared to stay up late or get up early. All auction calls come from Europe at all hours of the night and day.
Mostly it's Asia with the 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. But I find that you're better off waking up and not being the underbidder, which you always are if you're on the phone.
I think all three of you have cloned yourself because the amount of work you see, the amount of ground you cover, even the pace at which you go through these fairs is absolutely extraordinary in the thoroughness. So I think.
Can I ask Jordan what he has bought lately? The last thing, probably this morning, but.
Well, I got a call about 2 months ago from a gallery, the Carroll Gallery in Santa Fe, about Judy Chicago. And the quick version is I said I bought some of her work, think she's brilliant, and went down to meet her. And she was just a ball of fire and a huge impact on the art world. So we bought all of her prints and multiples and a number of her other smoke screen images and so forth. And we've committed to do a catalog raisonné for her and working on a national exhibition of her work. And I never tried to make a big effort to meet artists over the years because I guess I was always afraid when their work meant so much to me. If I met one of them and they just were a jerk, I'd be so upset about the conflict of loving the work, but thinking, why couldn't they have been a nicer person? But I'm fortunate to say of all the artists I've met with so far, the Frank Stellas, Judy Chicago especially, they've been wonderful human beings. And I'm enjoying the relationship with her. And I frankly said to her, I said, I don't think you're as well known as you should be because you've not made as many prints to get more of your work out to the public. So maybe she'll do some more editions and we'll help get her work around the country to let others see what she's done these last 20 and 30 years. That's really groundbreaking. But that's the latest last week, buying some more of her work.
I am too, Bill Weege. Take a look when you're out at Tandem Press tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah, no, we try to buy all the stuff that they produce there at Tandem, and it's a wonderful publisher. And again, as I said before, Paul is just the best, and her husband, wonderful people.
Right.
Just wanted to chime in and thank you. This has been really enjoyable. And my only regret is that we're running out of time and I wasn't able to ask questions, too many from the audience, but you guys were great and asked each other questions and I think answered a lot of that were in the Q&A. So thank you so much. Thank you, IFPDA. Thank you, Metz and Jennifer and Nadine for your collaboration. This was fun.
Thank you, Jenny, for doing such a good job at IFPDA since you've been there. And just, we're all brokenhearted that the fair couldn't take place. I think you've done a heck of a job with all the virtual things of trying to keep the momentum going. My heart breaks for all the galleries, let alone all the museums that are under such huge financial stress because of COVID. But as they say, we will get through this and we'll survive and thrive in the future. So thanks for all you do and the directors of IFPDA.
Thank you.
Thank you.